To Willie McGinest, who's also got a few other names for us today on NFL Total Access, names that Kyle Long knows quite a bit about. The recently retired Bears guard is with us today. We've also got LaDainian Tomlinson with the secrets to his spin move.
Just a little bit.
You guys remember this? What it looked like?
Okay, spinning into the end zone like that one.
Who did it better than this guy?
This is just
get him off me, little kid.
Apparently, the secret has to do with the plant leg, and he'll tell us that whole story in just a bit. First, though, huge news out of New York today, where representatives from all 32 NFL teams met today and got us one step closer to a new CBA. Mike Garafolo and Tom Pelissero were hearing it could be done as soon as next week. Where are we in the process right now, Mike?
Lindsay, one big step today with all of the owners coming together here in Manhattan to vote on the negotiated terms between the NFLPA and the NFL to this point, and they did receive the requisite number of votes to get approval on the league's end. This will now be kicked to the players, and the NFLPA's executive committee and player reps will have a call on Friday to discuss the terms, and if they vote to approve this, then it goes to the entire body of players for them to approve it. So yes, within the next week or so, we could have a new collective bargaining agreement done well in advance of the start of the league year next month. However, if the players do not approve it at this point, one would think that this would be the end of this round of negotiations, and then we would come up against a deadline next year of a possibility of a work stoppage. So everyone that was in this building today, well, most folks, it wasn't a unanimous vote, most folks hoping that this gets done in the next couple of days.
So this is major. Obviously, the owners would like to see this go through. This is not being sent to the players for a counter owner. This is being sent to the players for ratification. What's in the deal, Mike?
We're looking at a 17-game regular season. That's pretty much been a foregone conclusion to this point. There will be more revenue kicked to the players. There will also be more player safety provisions, less hitting during training camp, even some restrictions into the regular season that maybe we haven't seen to this point. And there will be, at some point, an expansion of the playoffs, perhaps this season, adding one playoff team per conference. But really, the league believes that that's not tied to the CBA. So perhaps, even if this isn't approved, we will still see the playoff expansion this year. But the hope is you kind of roll that all in with a new CBA. The players really haven't pushed back on that anyway. They like the idea of adding another playoff team in either conference.
Okay, so 17 games.
Mike, the number one.
17 games, 2 more playoff games. It's easy to see why the league wants this to go through. Tom, he mentioned revenue sharing. Is that part of what the players would get in return? Like, what did they get out of this?
The number one issue throughout these bargaining sessions that date back to last spring, of course, has been revenue. And there's a pretty significant shift here toward the players' side. Under the current collective bargaining agreement, which was ratified back in 2011, players were guaranteed 47% of total revenue over the life of a 10-year deal, which means in any given year, they might have gotten 45 or 46%. Well, in this proposed new CBA, players will be guaranteed 48% of total revenue every year over the life of a 10-year deal. That would represent a $2.5 to $3 billion shift toward the players if they stay at 16 games. If the owners in the league pull the lever as expected to go to 17 games, players could get 48.5% or more of total revenue, and that shift could end up being upwards of $5 billion. That includes an increase in benefits. There is more performance-based pay. There are raised minimum salaries. The questions that the NFLPA Board of Representatives and ultimately the players now have to answer is, have they gotten enough to accept a pretty big move to a 17-game schedule?
Do you have a sense of what that answer is? I know you've been talking to people around the league today. Do you think that there are the votes there to get the two-thirds majority that they need tomorrow?
We'll have a lot better idea by late tomorrow afternoon, Lindsay, when that conference call involving the 32 player reps is over. What I can tell you is right now there is a faction of the reps who are committed to voting no on the deal in its current form. There are a variety of different issues for different people involved in that matter, but a lot of it boils down to the 17-game schedule, the impact on future generations, knowing that once you make this move, you're probably never going back to 16 games or fewer. There are also some economic things to consider, including the cap on a 17th game pay for high-paid players that would go into effect on guys who signed their contracts previously based on a 16-game schedule. This is not a slam dunk that the board approves it tomorrow. Expect a lot of passionate discussion. And if they vote yes, Lindsay, that is more or less ball game, because once 2/3 of the board votes yes, it's highly unlikely that over half of all players would vote no.
All right, well, it sounds like we will be talking again tomorrow. Tom Pelissero, Mike Garafolo, thank you very much. So, a few things to discuss with you three, and I'd like to start with you since as of like 2 weeks ago, if you hadn't retired, you would be voting on this as one of the members once it gets kicked out there. What are your thoughts on the 17-game schedule? Let's start there.
I'm not fully committed so far. I will say that, and I'm sure they can echo the sentiments here as guys who have played the game, but you look at the 17-week, 17-game schedule, and for a guy like myself who couldn't finish the last 4 years in their entirety, I can imagine that there's a lot of guys out there who are looking at this and scratching their heads saying, 17 weeks? I was struggling to get through 16, and the wear and tear on a season, and I know they talked about taking away the hitting in training camp, but you can never take away half-line run, defensive line versus offensive line. We're hitting every day. There's physicality, so if you guys can expand on this, my initial thought process is I am not committed to this as a player.
And it is tougher. You talk about different players in different positions. The skill positions, as of the receivers, defensive backs, quarterbacks, they probably don't really have as much contact as you do in the trenches, a O lineman, a D lineman, or linebacker. So the wear and tear is a little bit more. So when you talk about adding more strainers to that and trying to recover and then get ready for a playoffs, if you're going to the playoffs, that's a lot of football games. So I would say, depending
what are we getting?
Depending on who you're talking about, because if it's a big incentive to add that extra game and it makes sense to the players, then they'll be like, okay, I'll sacrifice a little bit more to get more.
Well, you heard him talking about the revenue sharing. You're essentially looking to potentially double the amount of money that you're going to get as players. That impacts the salary cap. That impacts the number of money that everybody's going to get from a contract standpoint. So you are getting something, right?
I mean, look at it in terms of a running back, okay? Which they're already devaluing our position and trying to get the running back at the bottom of the food chain, okay? So think about if we play 17 games, running backs already get beat up, and they need other guys to service them as they get hurt, right? So now you're bringing in more running backs. So now they're even devaluing your position even more. So are you, as a runner, really getting a piece of that pie? Is it really making a difference for you to do that?
Because it's more by committee than it is for as far as one guy carrying the load.
Absolutely. And Leonard Fournette has already come out and said that he's totally against him for that very reason. He's against this.
And we're talking about this stuff for season. We're thinking 17-game season. My thought is off-season. What are we getting? Time is money, as we know. The off-season is a special time for an NFL player, getting an opportunity to spend time with their family, their loved ones. Are we looking at maybe 2 weeks less in the off-season of off-season training, which would be priceless for a guy with a young family or something like that?
Okay, so that would help convince you. You brought up the 17 games, adding some wear and tear to a running back. You're also now adding an extra playoff game. So you've got 2 more teams that are going to the postseason and playing an extra game because only one team would get a bye in this scenario. So that's more wear and tear. But from a standpoint of just the extra game in the playoffs and extra teams getting in, do we like that?
I think I kind of like that, but it just depends. You talk about an extra team if you deserve, right? So if you look at the 2 teams that probably would have bounced in this year, what was it, 9-7 and 8-8? Do they really deserve to go to the playoffs?
It was the Rams and the Steelers that were gone.
8-8, 9-7. But if you're a 10-6 team and you got 3 teams in your division at 10-6, maybe that 10-6 team probably deserves to get in there. And this doesn't apply to all the teams throughout the league because everybody's not going to the playoffs. So is that check? What is that playoff check going to look like?
You know what? You got me here, LT. I hate to cut you off, but I've been talking about this all morning. We all know I've been to the playoffs one time. It was the wild card, and I looked at my check on Wednesday after the wild card. We lost, so it's the exit meeting. I look at the check and I say, this isn't right. Why does this look different than week 17? And because the regular season checks are in no way parallel to what we're seeing in the playoffs. So the question is it worth going to the playoffs for these guys? And then you have to look at not the star players, but the guys getting an opportunity at the end of the year who have dealt with, I've been behind this guy all year, he got hurt, now it's my chance. So they still want to go to the playoffs, but there has to be some sort of semblance of parallel between the two
and those
checks.
guys are also, they're getting a bump in pay.
Yes.
Okay,
Right.
Mr. Big Money
there's
Bags.
two sides to the story.
You took a hit in the
There's two
postseason.
sides
That's
to the
not true
story.
for everybody.
Yeah, you're right. And you know, most players, like, you know, when you go to the playoffs, you're not going to make the same type of money. So you have already made your money. What you have to be thinking about is those guys that's
The practice squad
guys.
and all the other guys
You
don't
have to
make as
give a
much
little bit
money.
for them, you know, and be willing to say, okay, I'm good with not making the same amount of money. I'm going to take care of my buddy here who's not making that much money. You have to take that into account. So, I mean, it's
Those
a tough
practice
thing.
guy guards is like, come on, get to those playoffs.
You know, we're asked to protect the shield all the time,
Yeah.
but at what point is the shield going to protect us?
What is there anything that you haven't heard in this CBA that you as players would like to see? It sounds like you kind of nailed something there in terms of the playoff check specifically. Anything for you, Willie?
I would say what racks my mind is why a lot of players don't fight for the health insurance. And if you look at what the health insurance now is, retired players, if you're vested,
What's
3
vested?
years.
Okay,
vested
3.
means 3 years in. So 3 years in, you're vested. You get
3
5
years of
years
active roster,
active
correct?
roster.
Okay.
That's a
you
good
get
distinction.
You get health insurance for 5 years after, and then it kind
Only
of
5
transitions
years?
into Cobra, and you have a fund that you can use more money to go. So if you look at the full screen of how I would like it set up, it would look something like this.
Wow.
3 seasons vested, you get 5 years of coverage. 4 to 9, you get 10 years vested, and then 10 plus years in the league, you get lifetime of health insurance. Because the things that happen with players that's played for a long time, those injuries, those things that they have to go to the doctors, those issues, replacement hips and knees and all the other things that happen, doesn't really happen until, 10, 15 years down the line. And your insurance runs out.
Yeah.
So I think the longer you play, the more you should be rewarded as far as health insurance, because at some point, every player who puts on a uniform will retire.
And to Willie's point, here's another thing that happens. So after you retire, they get you to go ahead and do workers' comp, okay? So you have to identify all your injuries from that point throughout your entire career. Now, say, Lindsey, after you go through your workers' comp, something comes up, something that you didn't tell the doctors at the time. You know what? You have to pay for the rehab or whatever the surgeries at that time that you have to go through because you didn't tell the doctors at the time of the workers' comp case that you had this injury. It just came up. So that's another problem where I agree with Willie. It should be, either 5 to 10 years to lifetime for guys that spent 10 plus years in the
Let
league.
me ask you this. What if you took the money from the revenue sharing, the extra money there? Would you be open to that money being kicked into a health benefits pool as opposed to just an extra money in your pockets now pool?
Well, I would rather, because for me, when you have kids and, you have to deal with those different things, and then life, after football, all the things you have to deal with, I would say that's more important. The dental, the health insurance, and all the things that we deal with, I would definitely.
And there's plenty of money now, right? Like
does
nobody's
Roger
not
have
enough
it in his
making.
contract?
I'm not sure if Roger
Goodell has it
but
in his contract,
but I know he negotiated.
I want it in my contract,
Right.
and I want it for a 10-year vet, lifetime health coverage.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it sounds like these kinds of things are good suggestions. It sounds like we're not at a point in this negotiation